Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Everyday is Saturday. I'm Matt Stahl. I'm with my partner, Brad Gatto.
Hello, Matthew.
Hello, Bradley.
Hello, Matthew.
There. Yeah, I like that. All right. So today we are choosing to, there's all sorts of myths out there. So today we're choosing one of those myths and we're going to tackle that.
Financial myths, specifically.
Financial myths.
we're not going myth busters on the bit here.
Dating myths.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
We are choosing a financial myth. And today we have chosen the myth of you should always, operative word, always max out your 401k. Before we tackle that, Brad, what have you been up to?
Well, we always tend to give the same answer. So I was trying to intentionally think of something different. So I'll tell you this. It's now been almost a month ago, but I recently got to go on a trip with my wife. It's actually technically a work trip. I was there with like 50 other financial advisors and their spouses, but I got to go to see the country of Switzerland.
Sweet.
And it was awesome. And I thought of your stupid dad joke probably 150 times when I was over there. Every time I saw the flag, which was a lot. So, oh man, if you're unfamiliar, Matt's favorite dad joke is, what is the best part about Switzerland? I don't know, but the flag is a big plus. Great country. Had a lot of fun. Very pretty, very clean, and very eclectic culture-wise. I did not know that about Switzerland.
I wouldn't expect that either.
Because there's a heavy influence of French in the west part of Switzerland, heavy influence of German in the east part of Switzerland. You get some Italian influence in south central Switzerland. I think they have 5 official languages. So those 3, French, German, Italian, English. And then I'm going to butcher this, but I think it's called Romansh, which is more like kind of a native, not a lot of people speak it anymore, kind of a dying language in the middle central part of Switzerland, but really cool country. Was a lot of fun. Always good to hang out with other financial advisors too, and just kind of rub shoulders and share ideas. So yeah.
Awesome.
How about you?
We did a family vacation and
Trip.
Yes. Very, very clear distinction. We did a family trip. Difference between a trip and a vacation. If you have young kids,
Yes.
That's all we have to say. We did a family trip to, of all places, Bentonville, Arkansas, which my wife, Katie,
Did you lose a bet?
I had suggested this, had very, very low expectations. We happened
That's fair.
It's not, though.
I know.
I have great things to say. So we were going to be in Kansas City for a soccer event. And so we had a week to cram in some sort of family trip. And we were choosing somewhere around that vicinity. And Bentonville, Arkansas is the mountain bike capital of the world. Were you aware of that?
No, I was not. How far, you say Kansas City and then Arkansas, how far, and you're like, same vicinity, like how far apart are they?
So it was about 3 hours from Bentonville to Kansas City.
I would assume it was further.
3.5. It's pretty close. So it was a between 8 and 9 hour drive down to Bentonville from Minneapolis area. So easily doable. The really interesting thing about Bentonville, so they've jumped onto this mountain biking capital of the world, which is really cool because I enjoy that a lot, and turns out my kids do as well. And I'm slowly convincing Katie that she does. But that's where Walmart.
So brainwashing?
Yeah, it is. She's not going to listen to this.
Our wives aren't listening to this stuff.
So Walmart was founded in Bentonville. So really, really cool. The Walton family has actually put a whole lot of money and investment back into the community itself. So there's this huge network of
who are the Waltons?
The Walmart. Yeah,
I'm joking.
Well, I said the Walmart thing,
I know,
but they've invested a lot of money in the infrastructure of those trails. And what has followed is a whole lot of a big music scene, art scene, all kinds of restaurants and breweries, and just a really, really cool culture in general. So we actually had a blast. And if you ask Katie, she'll say that it exceeded her expectations by a mile. So,
well, it sounds like they were very low to start with. So
they were
probably wasn't that hard
for her. So yeah.
Well, let's jump in here. We've got a myth that we're going to financial myth that we're going to try to tackle today, which is you should always max out your 401k. So we have 5 reasons. Now, there could be more than this, right? But we're not trying to give it an exhaustive list of reasons, but kind of some of the bigger ones of why you may not actually want to max out your 401k. So I'm going to take the first one here.
Yep.
The first one is, I'm just going to call it liquidity. But here's what I mean by this. Mm-hmm. So a 401k, if you're unfamiliar, outside of just being a retirement account, is illiquid in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean you can't get your money back out should you want it in your working years. There's a magical age of 59 and a half where this penalty no longer exists. But should you want to take the money out, you either have to take a loan from yourself, which you have to pay yourself interest, or when you take it out, the tax bill is due, which it's always due. Okay, that's always going to be the case. Whatever your tax rates are, no matter if you're in retirement or now, you're always going to have to pay the tax bill, but they're going to add an extra 10% on top of it. So because it is far more illiquid than any other place that you can save money in your working years, what we see sometimes, Matt, is that people are putting money into their 401ks, which is great, but these people don't have cash reserves built up. They're kind of one paycheck from disaster or kind of living on an edge relative to cash flow and things like that. And that, frankly, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And so when you start to think about, okay, I actually have some discretionary cash flow, or I'm willing to live below my means, and I want to start putting money away, where's the first place that I should go? Our argument would be it should be into your cash reserves. And you should have somewhere between 3 and 6 months worth of your spending in a bucket where you can go get it at any point in time should you need to go get it. So if those buckets and those cash reserves are not already full, then maxing out your 401k and saving money in a bucket that you're going to have to pay a penalty to go after or pay a loan rate to go after. And even if you were going to take a loan, like it takes a while to process that. So it's not like you can just go grab it tomorrow or something like that. Just not the best place to go. So reason number one would be if you're the person that doesn't have the appropriate amount of cash reserves or liquidity built up already.
Yep. Excellent. So reason number two could possibly be the investment selection within the 401k itself. And so what we mean by that
is... Are you trying to say 401ks don't have the best investment selection?
So, perhaps not always.
Perhaps not always.
It's a very political answer.
Yeah, well, it's a very compliant answer is what it is.
I've been trained over many years. So, some of these are going to kind of build on top of each other. So circling back to what you just said, if someone's making, $400,000 a year, it's a completely different scenario than someone who's making $60K a year because of the contribution limit. So in some of these scenarios, if someone's making a whole lot of money, they should be able to do a lot of these things. So probably max out their 401k and do other things. But from the investment selection standpoint, we'll say often that we tend to see, being on the side of the industry that we are, we would tend to see this kind of the same usual suspects of mutual fund options within a 401k. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, number one, it's mutual funds.
Yeah.
Period.
So go back and listen to our episode on the comparing mutual funds versus exchange traded funds or different options out there.
Yeah.
To get an idea of the difference between that in general. But then the mutual funds themselves, we tend to see this short list of the same characters over and over and over again. What tends to happen is the people making the decisions on which funds to offer, they're not, a lot of times they might be an HR person.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with an HR person, but typically they're not going to be an investment professional or an expert when it comes to investment selection, right? So we tend to see this pattern where these handful of funds are an option in different 401ks across the board. And as we dig into those further, not only just are they the best option for what we're looking for, how expensive they are, et cetera. If we're either deciding to put money in the 401k in other places, it might make more sense to dig into that one layer deeper just to understand, are we actually getting what we want from an investment standpoint?
Yeah. So which by the way, let me just make this abundantly clear. We're not talking about putting any money into a 401k, right? The myth is you have to max it out. And so probably a good time to just pause and say, hey, look, if you've got a match option available to you,
right.
I still think that the first reason, this liquidity reason, you still should build cash reserves even before you go after your match, because behaviorally it's really important and functionally it's really important. But beyond that, some of these other things like investment selection, the match is 100% rate of return. If you put $1 and they give you $1, you've made 100% rate of return before you ever even pick an investment. So you can't, I should say you can't. It's usually not a good idea to not commit to, at least to the match. Right? Okay. So let's get that clear. But from an investment selection standpoint, Matt, well put that one, we're in the mutual fund space typically. That's not the only packaged product you can get into. Mm-hmm. So we're limited into one type of packaged product typically. And then inside of that limitation of just being a mutual fund based portfolio, there's thousands of mutual funds. And usually a lineup in a 401k has 10 to 15 options. Right. And so we're limited to one type of packaged product and then a very limited selection of that. And to your point, it could be an HR person. From a compliance standpoint, they do have compliance. They have to live and die by of being able to provide you with a selection that has enough diversification. But even some of the qualifications of how they can get past compliance testing, that may be a much longer podcast, different day. But let's just say it's easy to check the box from a compliance perspective and give you a compliant lineup. Right? So investment selection could possibly be a reason above and beyond the match. If you're looking to continue to save money, it might be better somewhere else just simply because you got a better choice from an investment perspective. Point number 3 is fees. So liquidity number 1, investment selection number 2. The third one would be fees. Matt, we did an episode on hidden fees and expenses here recently. Funny enough, I was talking to a client yesterday. He started by giving me the disclaimer that he had listened to the episode. And his disclaimer was, it was a good episode, but you subjected me to 52 minutes of, I don't even know if it's 52 minutes long, but it was one of the longer episodes that we've ever done. And I was like, well, why did you finish it then? He said, because I'm a completist. And he listens to all of our episodes. So now he's going to know I'm talking about him. So we're going to try to keep this less than 52 minutes. Fees. 401ks are not free. Okay. They're not. Oh. And there was a study done, 95% of, I think it was CNBC that did the study, 95% of plans, the participants pay the fees. So what that tells you, it is possible for the plan to pay the fees. They can do that, but 95% of them don't. The participants are going to pay the fees. Now, there could be some like general admin fees, but then it also could just be the fees associated with the investments themselves and the mutual funds themselves. And so just looking back, there's a recent study done here on the average cost associated with 401k plans, and it's between 0.88 of a percent, or what we would say is 88 basis points, just under 1%, up to 1.19% was kind of the average. But of course, it could be less than that. It could be significantly more than that. It's going to depend heavily on your plan. But that study was done by the National Association of Plan Advisors. And again, that was just a couple of years back. So fees could be one of them. 401ks are definitely or typically not the quote unquote cheapest way to invest.
Yep. And if you go back and listen to that, even a piece of our episode, 52 minutes.
I don't think it was longer, but I don't think it was 52.
I think that might be an exaggeration. Sorry. But you'll see that you have to start peeling the layers of the onion back to actually understand all the different layers of expenses that do exist. And within a 401k, because usually there are mutual funds, there's a whole lot of peeling to actually get to the bottom of it. That was compliant, wasn't it?
Sure.
Yeah.
You had to, if you're listening to this, you didn't get to see Matt's hand motions.
That's how I peel onions. You never peel an onion?
Yes.
Just kidding. I would cut it.
Do you do my grandma always told me that if you put a piece of bread in your mouth and you cut an onion, that it will.
The bread?
Yeah, so that you don't cry.
Is this one of those jokes? Where you get someone to.
I'm not telling you it works. I'm just telling you
your fingers, your hand is space, your face.
You like bite into a piece of bread and have it like hanging. It's ridiculous.
I heard the candle. Like if you light a candle next to it while you're cutting it.
Huh.
I have not tried.
Different podcast. Different podcast.
Myths about cutting onions. All right. The next factor could be your retirement date. And we alluded to this earlier, but 401ks are intended to not be touched until the age of 59 and a half. Now, there are some very specific ways to get around that and access that before then. At the age of 55, there's a whole lot that goes into that. So in general, they're designed to not be accessed till the age of 59 and a half. So if you happen to be a person that plans to retire earlier than most, pre-59 and a half, then it may not be the best idea to sock all of our money away into a spot, or we're not planning to touch it till 59 and a half. So if I'm set on retiring at 50 and I'm currently 38 years old and I'm aggressively saving money, definitely not the right place to be putting it, because then I'm not going to have access to that. Yeah. So That's it.
We just ran into this with one of the families we work with that wants to retire quite early. And I mean, the good news for them is they're going to, at the rate that they're saving, the way that they spend money, which is not a lot, they're going to be able to do that. But we had to be very cognizant of where it goes for this very reason, because if we did all into 401k, they would have 10 years where we would be stuck having to pay fees to get out. So when you want to retire is another reason why you may not want to max out your 401k. And the fifth and final point, again, not an exhaustive list, but the fifth and final point for us today is tax diversification. Here's what we mean by that. Typically, 401ks are a pre-tax savings account. In other words, you put the money in without having to pay tax on the money that you deposit. It grows on a tax deferred basis. When you pull it out, you do have to pay the entire tax bill associated with whatever your rates are at that time. Now, in 2023, it is becoming far more common for 401ks to offer a Roth option or an after-tax deposit that grows tax-free. In fact, with the passing of the Secure Act 2.0, if you're over the age of 50, you have a catch-up contribution you can make. You can contribute more. That catch-up contribution has to be a Roth contribution. It has to be after tax. So there is the opportunity to save from a tax perspective in a different way in a 401k, but not all plans. And so it's just something you need to look into. But at the end of the day, it is good to have tax diversification. There's only 3 tax buckets you can put money in: pre-tax, post-tax, and tax-free. And when you get to retirement, and you want to try to minimize your taxes as much as you can. And it is a different world, right? You go from a world where you earn income, right? And the paycheck comes in and you have to pay ordinary income taxes on that paycheck. I would argue that's a simple tax situation. You get to retirement, it's not earned income anymore. It's living on the assets that you saved. And that could be something like Social Security, but that could also be the pile, so to speak. And that pile that you save for yourself, more often than not, diversification is going to win out because flexibility tends to lead to better situations. So one of the reasons is if maxing out your 401k means you're taking 100% of the available dollars you have to save and putting it all there. Like if the max this year's $22,500, if that's all you can save and it's all going into a pre-tax bucket, when you get to retirement, you're going to have the vast majority of your money that you've never paid tax on. That lack of diversification can lead to a much higher effective tax rate all through retirement than you might have had otherwise if we were able to diversify out the tax liability. So tax diversification is another reason why you may not want to max out your 401k.
Well said. I don't think we run into that many scenarios where people would say they wish they could go back and allocate more of their money to a pre-tax 401k.
I wish I would have paid less of my bill. Because that's a great way to put it, actually. Like, because that's what you're choosing to do is either I'm just going to pay my IRS bill today or I'm going to choose to pay it later. And usually, to your point, after somebody hits 65, it's not usually like, man, I wish I would have paid the IRS less over the years so that I could pay them more now. That's a little unfair because it's possible that your tax bill would be less later. It's also possible that it would go up later. So that diversification is just important to have. So real quick recap. Liquidity, making sure we have cash on hand first before we ever max out a 401k. Investment selection could be limited. Fees could be higher than what you could get somewhere else. When you want to retire because of liquidity could be an issue. And then again, this tax diversification. So I will also, just for the sake of emphasis, say, if you have a match on your 401k at whatever level that is, that's money that's a rate of return, in essence, you can't get anywhere else. And so taking advantage of that is vitally important. So that is not the point of the myth. The myth is maxing out your 401k. And these are just kind of the top 5 reasons that we could come up with, but there's some other things that could come into there as well. So that said, hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of the podcast. As always, thanks for joining us for this episode of Every Day is Saturday. Matt and I genuinely have fun doing this. This is the first episode you've ever listened to, or if it's the 15th episode, but you have not yet subscribed to the podcast so you can be notified of when new episodes come out, we'd encourage you to do that. Feel free to tell your family and friends. It's free for them, just like it's free for you. If you want any more information on fiat, you can find all of that at our website. That's fiatwm.com, fiatwm.com. Not only is the podcast on the website, but there's a bunch of other free resources and education for you there as well. Or if you just want to figure out how to contact the firm, that is also on the website. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of Every Day is Saturday. I'm Brad Gatto. This is Matt Stahl. We will see all of you next Saturday.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.